When it comes to business storytelling, there are so many information out there. There are informations about the frameworks, how to use it, how it can be be used for leadership communication, for communication in general, for marketing and copywriting. There is so much that can be said around business storytelling. And because there is so much information out there, I really wanted to make sure that I shared what I knew from my experience and what I knew from working with my clients. So, in the past few weeks, in the past 4 to 5 weeks, I've been coming live with guests by myself, and I've been sharing with you what I have learned about business storytelling, how it can be strategically used in organizations to increase engagement, productivity, sense of belonging as well, and how it can be beneficial for ERG leaders, for teams, from new teams that are newly formed, but also how it can be strategically placed in the organization so that it works for the overall goals of the company. And there are different questions that came up throughout these conversations. They came up either during the conversation or offline. And today I wanted to address some of those questions. This is going to be the last live for this series around business storytelling and using it as a leadership tool. So today I wanted to address a couple of questions, but before I do that, in case you haven't watched the previous live, my name is Beatrice Kabutakapua. I am the founder and CEO of the Business Storytelling Center, which is a company where we train and coach leaders so that they are able to find their stories, own them, and then communicate them and share them to use them as a leadership tool, whether it's for connecting with their teams, communicating with their teams, or it's for engaging with them, or even to increase their personal branding and increase their visibility outside. So this is what we do, and this is what I've been talking about for the past few weeks. And a lot of it is the theory, right? A lot of the information that I've shared during these LinkedIn Live, a lot of the conversations that I've had during these lives have been around the theory, about the reasoning behind business storytelling, around why it works, and the scientific reasons, and the practical examples. But the truth is that storytelling, like any other arts, need to be practiced. It needs to be put in action. You need to start doing it so that you can see how much of an impact it has. And this is why we have organized an in person business storytelling session. It's going to be run here in London in 3 days on June 6th. It will be 2 hours and a half, where I will walk you through the framework that I use with my clients as well, to understand where a leader starts with storytelling and what are the elements that you need to keep into consideration throughout the journey. We will focus in particular on finding the stories. So, a lot of the time when we talk about storytelling, leaders often start with the question, but what actually is my story? So in the session, we are going to focus in particular on finding your story. It will be a very practical session. It will be a very welcoming space. It will be a safe space where you can share your stories, or you might not want to share it, but you will definitely learn and put the knowledge in practice, which is what you need when you're telling stories. So this is happening on June 6th. We have a couple of tickets left for this session, and we haven't scheduled the next one yet. So if you want to put the theory into practice and you want to make sure that you use storytelling to increase your visibility, to communicate in a clearer way, and to inspire people when you are sharing stories as well, make sure that you book your ticket I'm going to share the link to the Eventbrite page in the comments, and you can book it there. Or you can send me a message and we can have a quick conversation around it if you have any questions. So this is happening June the 6th, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. But let me know if you have any questions. Also, if you're joining live, many people are watching the replays, but if you're joining live, make sure that you say hi in the comments and share with me what brought you to storytelling. What is your interest around storytelling? So today I'm going to focus on answering some of the questions that oftentimes people have around business storytelling, some of the questions that came up during these conversations, and some others that I've heard offline. So the very first question that I found very interesting is this one. So how do I become a person who likes to share stories? And this question comes from the fact that not every leader feels comfortable sharing stories. Not every person feels comfortable sharing stories. And there are different reasons for that. One of the reasons, and this is something that it's really important to understand to answer to this question. One of the reasons is that we have an idea of the storyteller. We have an idea of their personality, of their gender as well. We have an idea of their background. And then, if we don't see ourselves portrayed in that idea, if you don't see yourself portrayed in that idea, then it's very difficult to see yourself as a storyteller as well. Let me give you an example. We are very much used to see storytellers as extrovert or charismatic. If you're not naturally an extrovert, if you don't feel like you are a charismatic person, you will automatically start thinking that you need to become an extrovert or you need to become a charismatic in order for you to become a powerful storyteller. The truth is that a storyteller doesn't need a specific personality. It doesn't need a specific gender, heritage, age, or background or ability. Anyone can be a storyteller. And the powerful thing that relates to this question is that you can be a storyteller in your own way. We are not looking to create a series of robots who are telling stories in the same way, with the same energy, with the same accent, or with the same tone. You want to tell stories, you want to be a storyteller in your own way. That doesn't mean that the first time you do it, it will be super comfortable. You're probably stepping out of your comfort zone of what you're familiar with, so it will be uncomfortable, and you want to embrace that sense of feeling uncomfortable. But you can still be your own person, your own self, and tell stories. You can be an introvert and tell stories. You can be a person who prefers to have conversation with fewer people, and you can be a storyteller. The who you are doesn't prevent you from sharing stories. What might prevent you from sharing stories are more likely sense of fears, sense of feeling uncomfortable, sense of not being sure of what to say. And those are all things that can be addressed. Those are all things that you can work on, right? So those are not the things that are going to stop you from sharing stories. Those are the things that you want to work on so that you can share stories in a way that it's true to you. Okay. This is the first question. If this resonates with you, let me know in the comments because I'm looking forward to see what you share about this. Now, the second question that came up, I think it was the first live, but the second question that came up was around audience. So how do I know what my audience need? And this is a question that come up very often because you could potentially tell millions of stories, right? And those stories might have different length. They might relate to people in a different way. So how do you know which story to share? And I love this question because it really goes to one important skill that you need to master when you are working on when you're going on to your storytelling journey. And that skill is listening. One of the most important part of storytelling, one of the pieces of storytelling is listening to your audience. What does that mean? That means that when you are going to tell a story, you want to make sure that you know what your audience needs to hear. And for you to know what they need to hear, you need to listen to them. And how you listen to them changes depending on the context. It might be that you actually have previous conversations with a group of people from your audience, and then you address something in particular that they mentioned. It might be that they shared something, or you read some conversation, so you know what they're talking about that you could help them with, and then that's another listening part. It might be that someone else listen for you, and then they report to you and they tell you what needs to be done, what needs to be addressed. It might be that the current situation, like the world situation, for instance, is sending you signals of what might worry, for instance, employees, and then you want to address those. It's really about listening, and you can listen in different moments. You can listen before you share the story, because and that's the ideal thing. That's the ideal situation. You listen before you share the story so that you are informed around the topics or the elements or the stories that your audience need. You can listen during the storytelling, and that really means, reading the room, understanding whether people are following, understanding whether they get what you say, seeing whether they are engaged. It's really about reading the room and reading people around you. And you can also listen after the story has been shared. As I said, the ideal thing is to listen before, but if you can have an educated guess about what your audience needs to hear, then you can go ahead, share the story, and after, you listen to the audience. And that means you listen to their feedback, you listen to their follow-up questions, you listen to what they share with each other, because that's going to improve your next story. That's going to educate you on what else they need to. And this is a really important skill in storytelling that it's often not mentioned, but you really need to listen. Obviously, there are other elements, and these are some of the things that I usually share when I share my storytelling framework. But other elements are around listening, but also around understanding where your audience is, so that you know how much time they have as well. But also other questions like, how do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do as well? Those are all questions for which the answers are going to inform the story that you're going to share. So you always want to start with the audience, with what they need. Storytelling is a great act of kindness. So you're giving out a piece of your story, you're giving out a lesson, you're giving out an experience so that someone else can learn something from it. But you really need to focus on what the other person need to learn from it, which means that you need to listen, you need to focus on them. If listening is something that you want to improve and you want to explore a little bit more, let me know in the comments, because I can send you a blog post that I wrote about listening some times ago, and the TEDx talk about the getting used to listen more rather than having the conversation where you're waiting for what people are going to say so that you can reply, but you're not actively listening. So let me know if listening is one of the skills that you want to make sure that you improve or that is improved in your organization. All right, so another question, and this comes up so often. So when I run my workshops and my training session on business storytelling, one of the in the framework, the very first step that I tell leaders to take is to find their stories. Then there is owning their stories, and then they share their stories and other piece of the framework. But the finding their story is the one thing that oftentimes blocks so many people. And there are at least two reasons why this happens. The first reason is that whenever I say that leaders need to find their story so that they can share them, people immediately think about this question: oh, what's my story? And if you sit down and think about it, it's such an overwhelming question, right? Because you could look at so many different elements. You could look at so many different moments in your life. You could look at so many different experiences. So, what is your story? Where does it start? Where does it end? What are the elements that are important? It's too much. So the very first reason why it's difficult to answer this question is that it's overwhelming. It's a lot. And the second reason is that you probably haven't spent enough time thinking about your story. You probably haven't spent time sitting at, outside and relaxing with your cup of coffee, thinking about, what is my story? What are the elements of my story? Where am I coming from in a way? What are the experiences that made me the leader that I am today? And that's normal. The majority of people don't have the opportunity to spend time and sit down with their stories, and so that they can understand them and they can articulate them. So my suggestion in answering this question is, don't ask yourself the question, what's my story? Instead of doing that, instead of thinking, oh, what is my story? And then trying to look at your whole history of your whole life, think about or ask yourself, what are some of the events in my life that have really shaped me? And there are different levels of answers. Oftentimes, people start with their data, their information, their age, what they do as a job, where they were born, their heritage, and all of these kind of things. And then they go into different levels. They go into childhood, they go into lived experiences, they go into important moments. There are different levels. And these are actually the levels that we are going to explore on June the 6th, when we are going to look at how to use storytelling as a leadership tool. So if this is something that it's starting to wake up something in your brain, let me know, because you are going to enjoy the session on June 6th. So instead of asking yourself, what's my story? And instead of overwhelming you, and instead of overwhelming also others, so if it's not your story that you're trying to figure out, but someone else, and there are leaders who want to share their stories, don't ask them, what's your story? Ask them, what are some events that have shaped you on the top of your mind? And then they can go a little bit further. And having a coaching backgrounds really help you to do that. It really helps to ask those questions in a deeper way. You can do it with a leader, you can do it with yourself, you can do it with your team as well. So don't ask the question, what's my story? That's overwhelming. Ask the questions, what are the elements? What are the events that have shaped you? What are the important events in your life? Now, the other question, and this is another one that comes up very often, is okay, I want to share stories, but how do I make sure that I don't go off on a tangent? How do I make sure that I don't talk too much, that I don't share too much, that I don't, stop from talking and, actually listen to other people? And this is something that happens so many times. So if you've done it, if you do it, don't worry about it. It happens to a lot of people. And the reasons why it happens when you're sharing stories are several. The first reason is might be that you're nervous, which is normal. You're a human being, you're allowed to feel anxious about sharing stories, you're allowed to feel a little bit nervous about it, so it's fine. And then in that state of feeling a little bit anxious, you might find yourself talking more than normal, or maybe that's just how much you talk. So you might find yourself talking more. Another reason is might be the fact that you haven't spent enough time reflecting on the story, which means that you don't have clarity around the goal of the story, around the lesson behind the story, which means that you go on and on and on, describing details, mentioning people who were present in the story, referencing to something else, and your story goes everywhere. A story is usually very clear, it has a clear path. It definitely involves like changes and swirls and something different, but it has a clear path and it has a clear purpose. When you haven't had the time to reflect on that purpose, then it's easier to go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And you don't want that, because then you will lose your audience. And then even if the story was powerful in some way, then you miss the opportunity to actually share it. So if you know that you are going to have to tell a story, reflect on it before. Think about what the audience need. Think about what the lesson that you're going to share is. And then remember that it's much more difficult to remove elements from a story than to add them. But that's going to be your job. You have a whole picture, now remove all the unnecessary things. And you can also find someone to reflect with around the story, someone to give you feedback as well. But make sure that you reflect on the story, know exactly what the audience needs and what the lesson that you're going to share is, and then take away as much as it's necessary for the story to still be engaging, inspiring, and clear, but also not too long, right? And one last tip on this: if you're finding yourself going off on a tangent, for instance, when you're doing a networking event and you're sharing a story, make sure that you simply have like a glass of water, something that you can drink. So you share a little bit, then you start to become conscious of the fact that you are going off the tangent. Ask a question to the person you're speaking with, and then take a sip of water. Give yourself a break, give yourself a pause, and give yourself the opportunity to actually have the conversation with the other person. All right, so last question. And then if you have any other questions or comments or things that you want to share, you can put them in the comments, and I will make sure to answer to them offline. So once the live is finished. So the very last question is something very interesting as well, and it's about sharing the story and seeing no reaction whatsoever from your audience, or very little reaction. What do you do then? So there might be very different reasons why that happens, right? It might be that the story really doesn't resonate with your audience. It might be that something isn't clear for them. It might be that they don't want to give you a reaction. So you want to keep on focusing on making sure that the delivery of the story is clear, is inspiring, you follow your path. Don't get distracted by their non-reaction. Unless you see that not the fact that the audience is not resonating with the fact that the story is not resonating with the audience means that they're not clear on something. And in that cases, you can ask them questions. You can interrupt your storytelling and then ask questions and see how people are reacting, what people say. But if you don't have the chance to ask a question and you just have to keep on going with the story, look at the people who are actually engaged. Focus on them. Focus on them and keep on going with your story. And then you can listen to the audience after. As I said, listening is something that you can do before, during, and after. And if something doesn't seem to be resonating, you can always ask for feedback after. You can ask for questions after. You can ask people what their thoughts or their reflections around those were, right? So don't panic, don't lose track of your story. Just keep on being focused on the people who you see are engaging. Ask questions if it's relevant and possible, and then make sure that you listen to the conversation after. Right. These were the questions that I wanted to make sure I addressed today. If you have any other questions around business storytelling, you can always send me a message. You can post in the comments here, or you can also join the newsletter where I share every 2 weeks information and tips around business storytelling and how to use it as a leadership tool. When it comes to using business storytelling as a leadership tool, as I said at the beginning, the practice is the most important part, is the part that really makes you think about what else you need to improve. It makes you see what are you doing well already, and it makes you feel more confident about doing it in the workplace. So you do it in a safe space, you practice in a safe space, and then you can go in the workplace and do it there as well. So if this is one of the results that you want to see this year, if you want to make sure that you are more visible, that you are more vocal, that you are more confident as well, and you want to use storytelling to do that, make sure that you sign up to the session that you have organized for June the 6th. It's going to be a lunch session, so it will be on the lunch break, and we still have a couple of tickets left for it. So if you're interested in it, let me know. You can directly book it in the comments. I will put the link to it, or you can send me a message. All right. So this is it for me today, and this is it for this series of lives on business storytelling and how to use it in a strategic way as a leadership tool. If you have missed the previous recordings, make sure that you go and watch them. I can probably put them in the comments as well, but make sure that you watch them because there is a lot that came out from it, and there is a lot that came out from the conversation that I had with other leaders. So make sure that you watch those. Hopefully, I will see you on June 6th. Otherwise, send me a message once you have watched this because I'm looking forward to hear your feedback and your aha moments and your takeaways. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.